You open your eyes to the same golden light that has filtered through marble columns for millennia, and the quality of that light tells you everything about the day that stretches ahead. It is neither morning nor afternoon in any mortal sense. Time here exists in a perpetual state of perfect illumination that knows no shadows, no variation, no hint of the passage of hours that gives meaning to mortal existence. The light enters through windows carved from single sheets of celestial crystal, and each ray carries within it the accumulated weight of eternity, heavy with the knowledge that this same light fell across your face yesterday and will fall across it tomorrow, and has been falling across it since the world began to turn. The air that fills your immortal lungs carries the scent of ambrosia, sweet, cloying, eternal, and you breathe it in as you have every morning since time lost meaning. It tastes of honey that has never known flowers of fruit, that has never grown on trees of sweetness, distilled from the very concept of sweetness itself. Your divine palate recognizes every note in its complex perfection, and therein lies the problem. There are no surprises left in ambrosia, no subtle variations to discover, no moment when the familiar might become wonderful again through the simple alchemy of change. Your bed, carved from a single piece of cloud-white stone that fell from the heart of a star, feels neither warm nor cold beneath you. It simply exists, as do you, in this space between dreaming and waking that stretches into infinity. The stone remembers the shape of your divine form from countless nights of rest that brought no restoration, because there is nothing in you that needs restoring. The pillows, stuffed with down from birds that never lived but exist only in the perfect idea of softness, cradle your head with a comfort so complete it has become uncomfortable in its very perfection. The sheets that cover you are woven from moonbeams and starlight, their texture simultaneously substantial and ethereal, warm and cool, present and absent. They shift and flow around your body like liquid silver, responding to your slightest movement with the fluid grace of water, yet they hold their form with the persistence of silk. Each thread contains within it the light of a different star, and when the fabric moves, it creates patterns of illumination that would drive mortal eyes to madness with their beauty. But your divine vision sees every thread, every pattern, every possible configuration of light and shadow, and what should be wonder has become simply another perfect thing in a realm where perfection is the only possibility. The silence of Mount Olympus greets you first, but it is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of sounds so familiar they have become like breathing. In the distance, you hear the soft tinkle of Hebe's goblets being arranged for the 1,000th time this century, each crystal note pure and perfect, and precisely the same as every note that came before it. The goblets are carved from ice that never melts their surfaces, etched with patterns that tell the story of every celebration that ever was or ever could be, and their music is the sound of joy crystallized into something beautiful and empty. Closer, you hear the gentle whisper of wind through Zeus's beard as he contemplates yet another decree that will change nothing, because everything important was decided long ago. His breathing is the rhythm of cosmic thought, deep and slow and patient, and each exhalation carries with it the weight of absolute authority exercised over a realm where authority has no meaning because rebellion is impossible and obedience is automatic. The soft splash of fountains provides a liquid counterpoint to the crystalline music of Hebe's goblets. These fountains have been flowing since the world was young, their waters falling in patterns so mathematically perfect they form visual music in the air. The water comes from springs that tap directly into the source of all moisture in the universe, and it tastes of every rain that ever fell, every tear that was ever shed, every drop of dew that ever sparkled on morning grass. But like everything else in this place, even the water has been perfected beyond the point where it can provide refreshment. You stretch, and your divine limbs move. With the same fluid grace, they always have joints that know no stiffness, muscles that remember no fatigue, bones that bear no weight, because weight is a concept that applies only to things that can break. Your body is a masterpiece of immortal engineering, every curve and angle calculated to embody the perfect intersection of strength and beauty, function and form. But perfection, you have learned, is a prison made of the finest materials, and even divine flesh can feel the weight of its own flawlessness. Your reflection appears in the polished obsidian mirror that occupies the eastern wall of your chamber, and you see yourself as you have always been and always will be. The mirror itself is a gift from some forgotten mortal king who sought to curry divine favor by offering the most perfect thing his craftsman could create. Its surface is so flawless, it barely seems to exist, and in it you see not just yourself, but the accumulated weight of endless tomorrows stretching ahead like a golden chain that binds you to this eternal moment. The face that looks back at you is beautiful, beyond mortal comprehension, but it carries in its perfect features the subtle marks of immortal fatigue. Eyes that have seen too much, shoulders that bear the weight of endless responsibility, lips that have spoken every word that can be spoken, and now rest in the careful neutrality of someone who has nothing new to say. Your divine features are symmetrical to a degree that would make mathematicians weep, but symmetry is not the same as life, and perfection is not the same as beauty. You rise from your bed, and the marble floor beneath your feet is neither warm nor cool. It exists in that perfect temperature that knows no seasons, no variation, no reference point against which it might be measured and found either comfortable or uncomfortable. Your footsteps make no sound as you move toward the great windows, because even sound has been perfected here, refined to the point where only the most essential auditory information is permitted to exist. The windows look out over all creation, and through their crystal clarity, you can see the mortal world spread below like a vast tapestry woven from thread of every color imaginable. The mortals are beginning their day, scurrying about their brief lives with the urgency of mayflies, and you watch them with something that might be envy if you could remember what wanting felt like. Their movements have the chaotic beauty of imperfection, stumbling, hurrying, pausing to rest or laugh or weep, each gesture unique and unrepeatable because it emerges from the intersection of desire and limitation that defines mortal existence. From this divine height, you can see the patterns of their lives with the clarity that comes from cosmic perspective. Cities rise like complex crystals from the earth, their streets forming geometric patterns that would be beautiful if they were intentional, but are magnificent because they emerge from the accumulated decisions of millions of individuals pursuing their own small purposes. Rivers wind through valleys with the fluid logic of water, seeking the easiest path, and their curves tell stories of geological time that even immortals find impressive in scope. The sky above the mortal world shifts and changes with the rhythm of weather systems that obey natural laws rather than divine will. Clouds forming and dissolving, winds carrying the sense of distant places, rain falling where it is needed, and sometimes where it is not. This chaotic dance of atmospheric forces has a beauty that your carefully controlled divine environment lacks. The beauty of systems so complex that even omniscience cannot predict their every outcome. You dress in robes that never wrinkle, never fade, never change, and the ritual of dressing has become a meditation on the nature of permanence. The fabric slides over your skin like liquid starlight, its texture simultaneously familiar and alien, comforting and alienating. Each fold falls in precisely the same configuration it has adopted for millennia. The drape, predetermined by the intersection of gravity and divine perfection. You fasten the robes with pins that have held the same folds in the same way for centuries, their weight in your fingers as familiar as your own thoughts. There is no choice in what to wear because perfection admits no alternatives. Your wardrobe contains infinite variations on the same theme of divine beauty, each garment a masterpiece of immortal craftsmanship, each one exactly suited to your divine form and function. But choice requires the possibility of error, and error is impossible in a realm where everything is exactly as it should be. So you wear what you have always worn in the way you have always worn it, and the ritual of dressing becomes another link in the chain of eternal repetition that defines divine existence. The day stretches before you like all the days that came before it, and all the days that will come after an unbroken expanse of identical time that extends to the horizon of forever. You have learned not to count them because counting implies the possibility that the number might matter, that there might be some significance to the accumulation of days or some goal toward which time moves. But divine time is not linear. It is circular each day, a perfect repetition of the day before each moment, containing within itself all the moments that preceded it and all the moments that will follow. In the growing light of eternal morning, you feel the familiar weight of consciousness settling around you like a cloak made of thought itself. To be divine is to be perfectly aware at all times, to exist in a state of complete consciousness that admits no rest, no forgetting, no merciful unconsciousness. Every sensation is experienced with absolute clarity, every emotion felt with perfect intensity, every thought pursued to its logical conclusion with the relentless thoroughness that immortality allows. This consciousness is both gift and curse. Gift because it allows you to perceive beauty with an intensity that mortals cannot imagine. Curse because it makes impossible the small mercies of inattention that make mortal life bearable. You cannot choose not to notice the perfection that surrounds you, cannot decide not to think about the implications of eternity, cannot simply exist without awareness of existing. You walk through corridors that gleam with the soft light of divine metal, and each step echoes with the accumulated weight of all the steps that came before it. Gold here is not precious, it is simply the substance from which everything was made, as common as wood in mortal homes, as ordinary as stone in earthly palaces. But this ordinariness of the extraordinary creates its own form of oppression, the crushing weight of being surrounded by perfection so complete that it becomes mundane through its very magnificence. The walls rise around you in flowing curves that follow mathematical principles, so pure they would drive mortal mathematicians to despair. Each surface tells stories in bas relief, but they are the same stories told, the same way for the same audience that has heard them countless times. The carvings emerge from the golden surface with dimensional precision, depicting scenes of cosmic creation, divine intervention, and immortal triumph, with a clarity that captures every detail, while somehow missing the essential truth that would make these stories meaningful. Your fingers trail along the smooth surface as you pass, feeling the subtle warmth that emanates from within the metal itself. The gold is alive in some fundamental way, responsive to divine touch, pulsing with a slow rhythm that might be the heartbeat of eternity itself. Under your fingertips, the carved figures seem to shift and move, acting out their eternal dramas with the mechanical precision of clockwork, figures beautiful and empty, and forever trapped in the same gestures of heroism and glory. The corridor stretches ahead with the straight-line logic of divine architecture, its proportions calculated according to golden ratios that create perfect harmony of space and form. But perfection, you have learned, can be its own form of ugliness, and harmony can become discord when it admits no variation, no surprise, no moment, when the expected might be replaced by the wonderful. The hallway is magnificent, but it is magnificently boring, a masterpiece of divine design that has been experienced so many times. It has lost the power to inspire anything but the mild fatigue that comes from being perpetually impressed. The throne room looms ahead, vast and echoing with the accumulated weight of all the words that have been spoken within its golden walls. The space is designed to inspire awe, and it succeeds. But awe, like every other emotion, becomes dulled by constant exposure, worn smooth like a stone in a river, until only its essential shape remains. The ceiling soars overhead in arcs that defy mortal engineering, supported by columns that could bear the weight of worlds, decorated with frescoes that depict the glory of divine rule with artistic skill that no mortal hand could match. 12 thrones, arranged in a perfect circle, dominate the center of the room, each one a masterpiece of immortal craftsmanship, each one occupied by the same figure it has held since the beginning of memory. The thrones themselves are works of art that transcend the merely beautiful, carved from materials that exist nowhere else in creation, inlaid with patterns that capture the essential mathematics of cosmic harmony. cushioned with substances softer than clouds and more supportive than the strongest stone. Zeus sits with his chin resting on his hand, staring at something beyond the horizon of thought, and his posture contains centuries of accumulated contemplation. His beard, white as fresh snow and soft as sea foam, moves gently in the eternal breeze that flows through this place, each strand perfectly placed, each curl falling according to the divine geometry that governs all things in Olympus. The great thunderbolt leans against his throne like a walking stick for an old man, though Zeus has never aged a day, its surface crackling with contained lightning that illuminates the air around it with brief flashes of pure energy. His eyes, when they focus on anything at all, hold the accumulated weight of absolute authority exercised over eons of time. They are eyes that have seen every possible outcome of every possible decision, that have contemplated every angle of every problem until contemplation itself becomes a form of paralysis. In their depths, you can see the terrible burden of omniscience. Knowing everything means that nothing can surprise, nothing can delight, nothing can inspire the simple pleasure of discovery that makes thinking worthwhile. Hera sits perfectly straight in her throne, her posture so precise it seems carved from marble, and her hands rest folded in her lap with the geometric precision of centuries of practice. She watches Zeus with eyes that have seen all his secrets and forgiven none of them, her gaze steady and patient and filled with the accumulated resentment of immortal marriage. Her crown, a circle of interwoven silver leaves, catches the light, but never sparkles. Even brilliance grows dull when it never fades, and beauty becomes oppressive when it cannot change. She speaks occasionally brief words that carry the weight of eons of shared silence, her voice modulated to convey exactly the right degree of disapproval or resignation or carefully controlled anger. Zeus nods or doesn't nod, and the conversation continues in the spaces between words conducted in the language of gesture and glance and carefully maintained distance that all long marriages eventually develop. Their communication has been refined by time into something so efficient it barely requires actual speech. A raised eyebrow conveys volumes. A slight shift in posture contains entire arguments. A sigh speaks truths that words cannot capture. You take your place among them, and your throne shapes itself to your divine form as it always has, the living metal flowing like liquid to accommodate your exact proportions before solidifying into perfect comfort. The cushion remembers your weight from yesterday and the day before and all the days stretching back to when days began its substance, molding itself to your body with the patient devotion of something that exists only to serve divine comfort. Around you, your divine family settles into the familiar rhythm of eternal coexistence. Not quite harmony, not quite discord, but something in between that has become the music of forever. Each god occupies their assigned position with the automatic precision of celestial bodies following their ordained paths, and the resulting composition has the mathematical beauty of a perfectly balanced equation. Ares sharpens a sword that needs no sharpening, the rhythmic whisper of whetstone on bronze, a sound so constant it has become like heartbeat, the steady pulse that marks time in a realm where time has no meaning. His movements are hypnotic in their repetition. Stroke, turn, stroke, turn, stroke, turn. Each gesture identical to the last, each producing the same ring of metal on stone, each serving no purpose except to provide the illusion of activity in a place where all activity is ultimately pointless. Athena reads from a scroll that unrolls endlessly, her gray eyes moving across words she has memorized, but continues to study anyway, seeking some new insight in text that contains no surprises. The scroll contains all knowledge that ever was or ever could be, its surface covered with writing in every language that has ever been spoken. But knowledge without application becomes merely information, and information without purpose becomes mere decoration for consciousness that has nothing else to contemplate. Apollo tunes his lyre with fingers that know every possible note, seeking a perfect pitch that was achieved long ago, but must be maintained simply because that is what Apollo does. Each adjustment of the strings produces sound of mathematical precision, each note perfectly calculated to harmonize with all the others, each chord a masterpiece of musical theory that says nothing new, because everything that can be said with music has already been said countless times. The gold walls reflect your assembly back to itself in infinite regression. Gods watching gods forever. The reflections multiply and divide, creating the optical illusion of endless repetition that perfectly captures the essential truth of divine existence. You are trapped in a hall of mirrors, where every surface shows you yourself, and every reflection shows you exactly what you have always been and what you will always be. In the distance, barely audible above the symphony of divine routine, you can hear the sounds of the mortal world filtering up through layers of reality. The laughter of children, the songs of workers, the cries of merchants hawking their wares in busy marketplaces. These sounds reach you like echoes from another world, faint but somehow more real than the perfect harmonies that surround you, carrying within them the chaotic music of life lived without certainty, without perfection, without the terrible burden of knowing exactly how everything will end. In your hands, you hold the weight of what you're meant to be, and that weight has grown heavier with each passing eon until it threatens to crush the divine spirit that struggles beneath its burden. Perhaps it is a symbol of your dominion, a sheaf of wheat that never withers its golden stalks, heavy with grain that represents the eternal harvest, the endless cycle of growth and abundance that you oversee but can never participate in. Each kernel contains within it the potential for life, but potential without fulfillment becomes merely theoretical, and theoretical abundance provides no sustenance for the soul that hungers for meaning. Or perhaps you hold a scroll that contains all knowledge, its surface covered with symbols that represent every truth that can be known, every secret that can be discovered, every mystery that can be solved. The scroll weighs more than mountains, not in its physical mass, but in the accumulated burden of absolute understanding. To know everything is to wonder about nothing. To understand all is to find mystery nowhere to comprehend. Completely is to lose the beautiful uncertainty that makes learning possible. Maybe your hands cradle a mirror that shows truth whether you want to see it or not. its surface reflecting not just what is, but what was and what will be, revealing the naked reality behind every divine pretense and mortal illusion. The mirror is beautiful, its frame carved from crystallized time and polished to perfection. But beauty becomes torture when it cannot lie, when it cannot offer the small mercies of self-deception that make existence bearable. The object is magnificent, perfectly crafted, eternally significant, a masterpiece of divine artisanship that embodies some essential aspect of cosmic order, but it is also heavier than mountains, not in its physical weight, but in what it represents, the endless responsibility of being divine, the crushing obligation to embody perfection, the terrible burden of never being allowed to fail or falter, or simply exist without purpose. You set it down carefully on the arm of your throne, and it settles there with the patient heaviness of duty, its presence, a constant reminder of what you owe to the cosmic order that shaped you. The object pulses with its own internal rhythm, alive with the power that flows through all divine artifacts. But that pulse has become so familiar, it barely registers on your consciousness. Just another eternal heartbeat in a realm where hearts need not beat to sustain life. Around you, the others handle their own burdens with the same careful reverence, each divine being weighed down by the symbols and tools and responsibilities that define their cosmic role. Poseidon's trident gleams with droplets of water that never dry, each one containing an entire ocean's worth of storms and calms of tides that pull and currents that flow, of the endless movement of water seeking its level in a universe where level is relative and movement is often meaningless. The trident vibrates with contained power, resonating with every drop of water in every sea, river, and lake across all the worlds that spin in the cosmic dark. Poseidon holds it with the casual intimacy of eternal companionship, his fingers finding the same spots on its divine metal that they have touched for millennia. But the weight of all that water, all those storms, all those drowning sailors, and successful voyages, and fish swimming in the deep places where light never comes, that weight shows in his shoulders, in the slight forward lean of his posture, in the way his eyes sometimes lose focus as he contemplates depths that have no bottom. Artemis holds her silver bow with the same eternal partnership, the weapon shaped by divine hands to be perfectly balanced, perfectly responsive, perfectly deadly when the need arises. But the need rarely arises in Olympus, where there is nothing to hunt that poses any challenge to divine skill, nothing to stalk that can hide from immortal perception, nothing to protect that is not already perfectly safe within the golden boundaries of paradise. The bow sings when she draws it a pure note that cuts through the air like crystallized moonlight. But the song has become so familiar, it no longer moves her. She knocks arrows that never miss their mark, draws a string that never breaks, aims at targets that present no challenge to her immortal skill. The hunt, which once provided purpose and excitement and the satisfaction of mastery exercised, has become simply another perfect routine in a realm where routine is the only possibility. Demeter cradles seeds that contain infinite harvests, each one pregnant with the potential for forests and fields and gardens that could feed all the worlds that ever were or ever will be. The seeds pulse with green life, warm against her divine palms, whispering of spring rains and summer sunshine and autumn gatherings that celebrate abundance. But abundance without scarcity has no meaning. Harvest without the possibility of famine provides no satisfaction. And growth without the risk of death becomes merely mechanical reproduction rather than the miracle of life. Apollo balances his lyre against his shoulder, the instrument so perfectly crafted it seems to play itself, generating melodies that emerge from the intersection of mathematics and beauty harmony and inspiration. But inspiration requires the unknown, and there is nothing unknown in a realm where all knowledge is available and all mysteries have been solved. His music is technically perfect, emotionally sophisticated, artistically unassailable, and completely empty of the spontaneous joy that once made him the god of creative expression. The weight you carry is not just these physical manifestations of power, but the accumulated layers of prayer and expectation that drift up from the world below, like invisible smoke settling on your divine consciousness, like sediment in a still pond. The mortals burn offerings and whisper your name, and each whisper adds another grain to the mountain of obligation that rests on your shoulders, another thread to the web of expectation that binds you to your role as cosmic intermediary. They want rain and sunshine, victory and peace, love and wisdom, healing and justice, beauty and truth, and their wanting becomes your burden to bear. Each prayer carries with it the weight of genuine need, mothers pleading for sick children, farmers hoping for good weather, soldiers seeking courage in battle, lovers asking for fidelity, students pursuing understanding artists, reaching for inspiration. The prayers are beautiful in their humanity, touching in their vulnerability, heartbreaking in their faith that someone divine is listening and caring and capable of providing what mortal effort cannot achieve. But the mathematics of prayer are impossible. For every wish granted, 10 others must be denied. For every miracle performed, 100 natural laws must be bent or broken. For every intervention, consequences ripple outward in patterns too complex for even divine wisdom to fully predict. The weight of answering prayer is matched only by the weight of not answering, and both choices carry their own forms of divine guilt. You remember when the weight was lighter, when the world was young, and prayers were rare and simple. A farmer asking for good weather, speaking words shaped by genuine need and offered with sincere gratitude. A woman hoping for safe childbirth, her prayer simple and direct and unencumbered by the complex theology that later generations would construct around the simple act of asking for help. A sailor seeking calm sees his offering thrown into waves that he understood as divine domain rather than natural force. Now the prayers come in torrents, millions of voices raised in supplication, contradiction, demand. They want you to be everything to everyone, to solve problems that have no solutions, to provide comfort for sorrows that cannot be comforted, to make sense of a universe that operates according to principles that admit no exceptions. The impossibility of meeting these expectations settles around you like a cloak made of lead, beautiful in its golden weight, but crushing in its accumulated mass. Religious systems have grown up around your name, complex hierarchies of belief and practice that interpret your divine will through human understanding that can never fully grasp the reality of immortal existence. Priests speak in your name, claiming authority they do not possess, promising interventions you cannot provide, building temples that enshrine misunderstanding in marble and gold. The gap between what mortals believe about gods and what gods actually experience grows wider with each passing century, until prayer becomes a conversation between humanity and its own projected hopes, rather than communication with actual divine beings. But you carry it because that is what gods do. You bear the unbearable with divine grace, and you never let it show that sometimes you long to set it all down and simply exist without purpose or expectation or the crushing responsibility of being someone else's salvation. The weight shapes you as surely as a river shapes stone, wearing away pieces of yourself you didn't know you had until they were gone, leaving behind a divine being who is perfectly suited to bear infinite burdens, but can no longer remember what it felt like to exist without them. In the silence between one breath and the next, you feel the full magnitude of what it means to be eternal, the weight of carrying forever, of never being allowed to rest, of maintaining perfection across infinite time, of being responsible for cosmic forces that operate on scales so vast that even immortal consciousness struggles to encompass them, the weight of being needed by billions of beings who will live and die, while you continue unchanged, of being worshipped by creatures who cannot understand what they worship, of being both utterly essential and completely isolated in the golden prison of divine perfection. You speak to Hestia in the language that all immortals learn, first the language of silence, where meaning flows between consciousness without the crude mediation of words. She tends her eternal flame with movements so graceful they seem choreographed by the fundamental forces of the universe itself. But you know, they are simply the result of countless repetitions of the same sacred gestures, refined by eons of practice until they achieve the fluid perfection that transforms repetition into ritual. The fire burns without fuel, drawing its sustenance directly from the cosmic forces that maintain order in the universe, and its flames dance with patterns that would hypnotize mortal eyes, but have become as familiar to you as your own thoughts. Each flicker tells a story: the birth of stars, the formation of planets, the first spark of consciousness in beings who learned to worship fire as the gift of gods. But stories become mere information when you have heard them all countless times, and even cosmic significance dims when it is experienced without variation. Her eyes meet yours across the dancing flames, and in that glance, you share the conversation that has been ongoing for millennia, conducted entirely in the space between words, where immortal consciousness touches immortal consciousness without the barriers that separate mortal minds. You speak of the loneliness of perfection, the burden of being needed, but never truly known the strange comfort of duty that has become so familiar it feels like love, even when love itself has been worn away by endless repetition. The conversation flows through layers of meaning that mortal language cannot capture, You communicate in concepts rather than words, in emotions that blend and separate like colors on a divine palette, in memories that are shared rather than described. The exchange is intimate in the way that only immortal beings can experience intimacy, consciousness, meeting consciousness without the protective barriers of flesh and personality that mortals use to maintain their individual boundaries. Hestia understands because she carries the same weight, the responsibility of keeping the heart of the home burning not just for gods, but for every mortal who ever lit a candle against the dark. Her domain is the hearth, the center around which domestic life revolves, the sacred space where families gather to share food and stories and the simple comfort of being together. But she presides over this sacred space from the outside, maintaining the divine fire that makes mortal fires possible, while never experiencing the warmth of actually belonging to the family that gathers around her flame. She was the first to learn the art of voluntary diminishment, stepping back from the throne that was rightfully hers to avoid the conflicts that tear at the others like cosmic winds that never cease. In her sacrifice, she found a different kind of power, the power of being essential without being demanding, of being loved without being feared, of being honored without being worshipped in the complicated ways that turn divine relationship into cosmic drama. But the cost was high to be the goddess everyone needs, and no one thinks about to burn steadily, while others blaze in glory to provide the foundation that makes all other divine activity possible, while remaining invisible in her very necessity. She is the silence between notes that makes music possible, the empty space between words that gives meaning to speech, the darkness between stars that allows light to be seen. You watch her tend the fire, and the rhythm of her movements becomes a kind of meditation that spreads outward from the flame to encompass the entire divine realm. Each gesture is precise, economical, perfectly suited to its purpose, but the accumulation of these small perfections creates something larger than their sum, a demonstration of how meaning can be found in repetition when the repetition is undertaken with full awareness of its essential nature. The careful placement of each piece of divine kindling, though the fire needs no fuel to burn, the gentle adjustment of flames that require no adjustment, the soft humming that emerges from her throat, like the sound of contentment itself. These small rituals have sustained her through eons of sameness, providing structure and purpose in a realm where structure and purpose are otherwise impossible to find. The fire speaks in the ancient tongue of crackling and whisper, telling stories that have no beginning or end, but simply exist in the eternal present, where all divine experience takes place. Its light touches the faces of the assembled gods, revealing expressions that shift like smoke, boredom masked as dignity, longing disguised as satisfaction, the deep fatigue that comes from being perfect. For too long, the careful neutrality that immortal beings adopt when they have experienced every possible emotion and found them all equally insufficient. In Hestia's flame, you see reflected the truth that no one speaks aloud. Even gods grow tired of being divine. The fire burns with steady constancy, but its light reveals the cost of that constancy, the way unchanging perfection becomes its own form of death, the way eternal flame becomes indistinguishable from eternal ice when neither can offer the possibility of transformation. The language of silence that you speak with Hestia is rich with nuances that words cannot capture. There is the silence of shared understanding, comfortable and warm like her eternal fire. There is the silence of shared burden, heavy with the weight of cosmic responsibility. There is the silence of shared loneliness, the acknowledgement that even in the company of other immortals, each divine being exists in fundamental isolation from all others. But there is also the silence of acceptance, the peace that comes from no longer fighting against the essential nature of divine existence. This is the silence that Hestia has mastered more completely than any other god, the ability to find contentment in repetition, meaning in duty, warmth in service, that expects no reward and receives no recognition except the continued existence of the cosmic order that her flame maintains. Through the silent language of immortal communion, she teaches you what she has learned through eons of tending the same fire, that meaning is not something you find, but something you create through the quality of attention you bring to each moment, even when all moments are identical. That purpose is not something imposed from outside, but something that emerges from within when you accept the role that existence has given you. That contentment is possible even in the golden cage of divine perfection if you learn to see the cage not as a prison, but as a sanctuary where the essential work of maintaining cosmic order can be performed with grace and dignity. The conversation continues without words, flowing through shared consciousness, like the flame flows through divine kindling, transforming the basic elements of immortal existence into something that approaches meaning. In the end, you understand that the language of silence is the only language that can contain the full truth of what it means to be divine. Too complex for words, too vast for symbols, too intimate for any form of expression except the direct touching of immortal mind to immortal mind. You have perfected the art of waiting without waiting for anything in particular, and this paradoxical skill has become one of the few forms of mastery available to beings who have already mastered everything else. It is an ability unique to immortals, the capacity to exist in a state of suspended expectation that never resolves into anything concrete, to maintain alertness without object, to remain poised for action that never comes and would serve no purpose if it did. The quality of divine waiting is unlike mortal anticipation in every essential respect. Mortals wait for specific things: the harvest, to ripen the storm, to pass the return of a loved one from a dangerous journey. Their waiting has shape and urgency defined by the possibility of satisfaction or disappointment, success or failure, joy or sorrow. The very uncertainty of mortal existence gives their waiting its poignancy, its emotional weight, its capacity to generate hope or fear, or the complex mixture of both that makes anticipation meaningful. Your waiting is shapeless, a general condition of existence, rather than anticipation of any particular event. You wait for something to change, while knowing with divine certainty that nothing will change. And somehow, this paradox becomes a kind of peace. The waiting itself becomes the activity, the suspension of expectation becoming its own form of fulfillment. You exist in the eternal moment between one thing and the next, but since nothing follows anything else in divine time, the moment expands to contain all possible experiences without actually experiencing any of them. Time moves differently when you have infinite amounts of it flowing like honey rather than water accumulating in pools, and eddies rather than rushing toward any particular destination. The great sundial in the center of Olympus casts shadows that wheel in their appointed circles, marking divisions of time that have no meaning for those who cannot age or die or change in any fundamental way. The sundial itself is a masterpiece of divine engineering carved from a single crystal that contains within its structure the essential mathematics of cosmic rotation. You watch the shadow creep from hour to hour, and the movement is both infinitely slow and impossibly fast. Slow because each moment contains eternities of unchanging experience. Fast because the passage of mortal time has become mere background noise to divine existence. The shadow moves with the precision of cosmic mechanics, but its movement measures nothing that matters to immortal consciousness, marking divisions in an experience that admits no divisions. Dionysus sits nearby, embodying his own form of divine waiting, holding a goblet of wine that never empties and never satisfies. He drinks, not from thirst, but from habit, the liquid flowing past divine lips that can taste every grape that ever grew, every celebration that ever was, every moment of joy that mortals have ever experienced through the gift of fermentation. The wine tastes of wedding feasts and harvest festivals, of soldiers drinking to forget what they have seen, and lovers drinking to celebrate what they have found of all the ways that mortals have used fermentation to transform the mundane into the magical. But divine wine, like everything else in Olympus, has been perfected beyond the point where it can provide the experience it was designed to create. The alcohol cannot intoxicate an immortal system. The flavor cannot surprise divine palates that have experienced every possible taste. The ritual of drinking cannot provide communion when the drinker exists in fundamental isolation from all others. Dionysus drinks because drinking is what Dionysus does. But the wine has become simply another perfect thing in a realm where perfection has rendered all experiences equivalent. His eyes hold a sadness that mortals mistake for wisdom, but you recognize it for what it is: the melancholy of perfect pleasure that has lost its power to please. The god of ecstasy, who cannot experience ecstasy, the master of celebration, who finds no reason to celebrate the divine embodiment of joy, who can remember what joy felt like, but can no longer access the experience directly. His waiting is for the return of feeling itself, for some sensation that might penetrate the golden armor of divine perfection and remind him what it was like to be moved by experience, rather than simply observing it. In the art of waiting, you have learned to find beauty in the spaces between moments, those brief eternities that exist in the pause between one word and the next, the breath between one note and another, the silence between thought and action. These micro-infinities contain all the life that divine existence allows tiny fluctuations of possibility in an ocean of predetermined perfection. The space between heartbeats, though divine hearts beat only because rhythm is aesthetically pleasing, rather than biologically necessary. The gap between thoughts, though divine consciousness flows in unbroken streams, rather than the discrete packets of mortal cognition. The interval between one perfect gesture and the next, though divine movement, follows patterns so refined they appear to be continuous. In these spaces, you sometimes catch glimpses of what existence might be like if it were not so perfectly controlled, so completely predetermined, so utterly without the possibility of surprise. Apollo sits across from you, waiting for the perfect note that will somehow be more perfect than all the other perfect notes he has played across the millennia. His lyre rests against his shoulder, its strings tuned to mathematical precision, its resonance calculated to produce sounds that embody the pure relationships between frequencies that make harmony possible. But harmony without discord has no meaning, and music without the possibility of mistakes cannot touch the heart in the way that imperfect music can. He adjusts and readjusts the tuning of his instrument, seeking some combination of frequencies that he has never tried before, some musical relationship that might surprise him with its beauty. But divine knowledge encompasses all possible musical relationships, and divine memory retains every combination that has ever been attempted. The perfect note he seeks is perfect precisely because it is impossible, not because it cannot be played, but because playing it would only add one more perfect sound to the infinite collection of perfect sounds that have lost their power to inspire wonder. Athena waits with the patience of absolute knowledge, her gray eyes scanning texts that contain every wise thought that has ever been conceived. Her waiting is for the emergence of new wisdom, for some insight that has never occurred to any consciousness in all the history of thought. But wisdom, like music, reaches completion in divine understanding. And once all wisdom is known, the pursuit of wisdom becomes simply the cataloging of what has already been discovered. The art of waiting that you have mastered allows you to exist comfortably in this suspended state, neither hoping for change nor fearing its absence, neither seeking stimulation nor avoiding boredom. You have learned to inhabit the eternal moment fully, to find in each identical instant the complete range of experience that immortal existence allows. The waiting itself becomes a form of meditation, a way of being present to existence without demanding that existence provide anything beyond its own basic fact. In this waiting, you discover that contentment is possible even when satisfaction is not, that peace can exist even in the absence of fulfillment, that meaning can emerge from meaninglessness when it is approached with the right quality of attention. The art of divine waiting is the art of finding infinite value in finite experience, of creating significance through the sheer persistence of consciousness rather than through the accumulation of new experiences or the achievement of external goals. The great hall echoes with the ghost of laughter that once filled it, and the sound of that phantom merriment is more heartbreaking than silence would be, because it reminds you of what divine joy once felt like before perfection drained it of all spontaneity. The architecture itself was designed to amplify laughter with curves and angles calculated to catch the sound of divine mirth. and reflect it back in harmonious waves that would build and multiply until the very stones rang with celestial joy. You remember when the sounds of divine merriment could shake the foundations of the world, when Dionysus's parties lasted for decades and left mortals drunk on divine joy for generations. The laughter that erupted from these gatherings was cosmic in scope, each divine chuckle containing within it the accumulated humor of entire civilizations, every guffaw echoing with the combined amusement of all the jokes that mortals had ever told and would ever tell. Now, the festivities have the mechanical quality of a music box whose spring has wound down but continues to play the same tinkling melody. The gods gather because gathering is expected. They laugh because laughter is required. They celebrate because celebration is part of the eternal routine that structures divine existence. But the forms have been emptied of their content, leaving behind elaborate rituals that perform joy without actually experiencing it. Aphrodite arranges her beauty with the practiced efficiency of someone performing a complex ritual rather than preparing for pleasure. Each gesture calculated to achieve maximum aesthetic impact rather than expressing any genuine feeling. Her toilette is a masterpiece of divine artistry. Every fold of her hymation falls in precisely the calculated curve to inspire maximum desire. Every strand of her hair catches the light at exactly the angle that will most effectively demonstrate the mathematical principles underlying divine beauty. Her mirror reflects infinite variations of perfection, each one as hollow as the last, and she adjusts her appearance with the same detached precision that a scholar might use to solve an equation. The beauty that emanates from her divine form is objective, measurable, undeniable, and completely empty of the subjective experience that makes beauty meaningful. She is beautiful because that is what Aphrodite is not, because beauty serves any purpose or provides any satisfaction. The mirror itself is a marvel of divine craftsmanship, its surface so perfect it shows not just physical appearance, but the essential reality that lies beneath all surface phenomena. In its depths, Aphrodite can see her own divine nature, reflected back with absolute clarity, immortal, unchanging, perfectly beautiful, and completely isolated from the very love that she was created to embody. The mirror shows her what she is, but cannot show her why that matters, or how to find meaning in the role that existence has assigned to her. The feast tables stretch endlessly through the great hall, laden with ambrosia that tastes of everything, and nothing nectar that promises satisfaction and delivers only the absence of want. The food is perfect in every possible way, visually stunning, aromatically complex, nutritionally complete, aesthetically pleasing, symbolically significant. Each dish represents the culmination of cosmic culinary arts, the perfect expression of flavors that mortal tongues could never fully appreciate. But perfection in food, like perfection in everything else, creates its own form of hunger, not physical hunger, which divine beings cannot experience, but existential hunger for the surprise, the disappointment, the discovery, the simple pleasure of not knowing exactly what something will taste like before you taste it. The ambrosia contains every flavor that ever was or could be. But knowing all flavors is like knowing no flavors. and tasting everything simultaneously is like tasting nothing at all. You eat because gods must eat, not from hunger, but from the habit of consuming that which sustains divine life. Each bite tastes exactly like every bite that came before it, and every bite that will come after creating a loop of experience that provides sustenance without satisfaction. The act of eating becomes purely mechanical, a function performed by a divine body that requires no nutrition but continues to go through the motions of consumption, because consumption is part of the behavioral patterns that define what gods do. Hermes tells the same jokes he has been telling for millennia, and the gods laugh because laughter is expected, not because anything is funny anymore. His wit is still perfect, his timing still flawless, his delivery still masterful, but humor requires surprise. And surprise is impossible when you have heard every possible joke and know the punchline before the setup is complete. The mathematical structure of humor becomes visible when you possess infinite knowledge, and understanding why something is funny is completely different from actually finding it funny. The sound of divine laughter is hollow, echoing off the golden walls and coming back transformed into something that resembles mirth but lacks its essential spark. The acoustics of the hall were designed to enhance the experience of joy, but they succeed too well, amplifying not just the sound of laughter, but its emptiness, making it impossible to ignore how mechanical the response has become. Even comedy becomes tragedy when it never changes, when punchlines arrive with the inexorability of sunrise, rather than the delightful surprise of discovery. Hermes continues to perform his role as divine entertainer, but the entertainment has become a form of cosmic duty rather than genuine expression, another perfect routine, in a realm where routine is the only possibility and perfection is the only standard. The other gods participate in these gatherings because isolation is the only alternative, and isolation carries its own burdens that are sometimes heavier than the weight of shared emptiness. Better to share the burden of eternal sameness than to bear it alone. Better to participate in hollow rituals than to face the full implications of divine existence without the distraction of social interaction. Zeus raises his goblet in eternal toasts that honor nothing in particular, his words perfectly chosen to convey the appropriate degree of cosmic significance while meaning absolutely nothing. Hera responds with gracious words that contain centuries of accumulated resentment delivered with such perfect diplomatic skill that their poison becomes indistinguishable from honey. The social dynamics of divine interaction have been refined to the point where every gesture conveys multiple layers of meaning while the surface remains perfectly pleasant. You participate because participation is expected. Laughing when Hermes reaches his punchline, raising your goblet when Zeus makes his eternal toast, pretending that this time will be different from all the times before. The pretense itself becomes a kind of comfort, a shared delusion that allows immortal beings to exist in proximity without having to acknowledge the full weight of what they have become. But underneath the performed joy, you all understand the truth that cannot be spoken. Laughter dies in Olympus, not because nothing is funny, but because everything is equally funny and equally unfunny. Because perfect understanding of humor destroys the very surprise that makes humor possible, because immortal beings can appreciate the mechanics of joy without being able to experience joy itself. You walk through gardens where every flower blooms eternally in the same state of perfect beauty, and the unchanging splendor of this divine horticulture creates its own form of melancholy. The roses never fade their petals, holding the exact same curve and color they have maintained since the world was young, each one a masterpiece of botanical perfection that embodies the essential idea of what a rose should be. Their fragrance fills the air with sweetness that never varies, never surprises, never fails to be exactly what rosescent should be. But the very consistency of their perfection robs them of the poignant beauty that comes from knowing that mortal flowers bloom briefly and then return to earth. The paths wind through arrangements that follow aesthetic principles so sophisticated they would drive mortal gardeners to despair with their complexity and precision. Every plant is positioned according to mathematical relationships that create perfect harmony of color, texture, height, and seasonal timing, except that seasons have no meaning here, where all plants exist in perpetual bloom, where spring and summer and autumn and winter blend into an eternal present that contains all seasons simultaneously without experiencing any of them. Persephone tends these beds with the careful attention of someone who understands that growth in this place is an illusion. The flowers do not grow. They simply exist in an eternal state of blooming that mimics life while containing none of its essential chaos. She moves among them with the grace of someone who has learned to find meaning in repetition, her fingers trailing over petals that spring back to exactly the same position the moment her touch passes, like memory itself returning to its original configuration. After being briefly disturbed, her presence here is particularly poignant because she alone among the divine beings has experienced the rhythm of change that gives meaning to existence. Half her immortal life is spent in the underworld with Hades, half in the upper world with her mother, and this division creates the only genuine cycle that exists in divine experience. But even this change has become routine, as predictable as the mechanical movements of cosmic bodies, and what once felt like liberation now feels like another form of imprisonment. She speaks to the flowers in the language of growing things, though they do not grow, and they respond to her words with subtle movements that suggest life without actually demonstrating it. The roses turn slightly toward her voice. The lilies adjust their petals to catch more favorable light. The vines shift their positions to create more pleasing compositions. But these movements are aesthetic rather than biological, performed because they are beautiful rather than because they serve any life function. The fruit trees that line the garden paths bear their burden, eternally branches heavy with golden apples and silver pears and jeweled grapes that never fall and never ripen beyond their current state of perfect maturity. You pluck an apple and bite into flesh that tastes of every apple that ever grew, the crisp sweetness of autumn orchards, the tart snap of early fruit, the complex layers of flavor that develop in fruit that is allowed to ripen slowly in natural sunshine. But divine fruit, like everything else in Olympus, has been perfected beyond the point where it can provide the experience it was designed to create, the concentrated essence of all possible apple experiences distilled into a single perfect flavor that satisfies every hunger except the hunger for something new, something unexpected, something that might surprise divine palates that have experienced every taste that can be experienced. Memory moves differently in these gardens than it does in any other place. Without the passage of natural time, without the markers of growth and decay that give mortal memory its structure, your recollections exist in a kind of eternal present where past and future become meaningless categories. You remember the first rose as clearly as if you saw it yesterday. But yesterday has no meaning when every day is identical to every other day. The past does not recede into comfortable distance. The way it does for mortals, it accumulates layer upon layer of identical experiences, building up like sediment in the ocean of eternity. Each perfect moment adds to the previous perfect moment, but since they are all essentially the same moment, the accumulation creates weight without creating meaning mass, without creating substance. Demeter walks beside you, her presence heavy with the weight of all the seasons she has shepherded through their cycles in the mortal world below. She is the one God whose domain requires change, whose cosmic responsibility is to ensure that spring follows winter, follows summer, follows autumn in the dance that makes mortal life possible. But here in the divine realm, all seasons exist simultaneously in perfect balance, and the very goddess of seasonal change exists in a place where change is impossible. She speaks of the poetry of cycles, the beauty of things that are born and die and are reborn, and her voice carries the longing of someone who understands the essential nature of life, but is condemned to exist outside its rhythm in the mortal world. Her power manifests as the endless cycle of growth and harvest death and renewal, the eternal return that gives meaning to temporal existence. But in Olympus, she can only remember what it feels like to be part of something larger than herself, something that moves and changes and grows according to principles that transcend individual will. The gardens reflect this paradox in their perfect beauty. They contain examples of every plant that has ever grown or could ever grow, arranged in compositions that embody the essential principles of divine aesthetics. But aesthetics without the possibility of ugliness becomes merely decorative, and beauty without the contrast of imperfection loses its power to move the heart. You walk among flowers that cannot wilt, trees that cannot die grass, that cannot be worn away by the passage of feet or time or weather. The perfection is absolute, undeniable, eternal, and completely sterile. The gardens provide visual pleasure and aromatic delight and symbolic satisfaction, but they cannot provide the one thing that mortal gardens offer: the possibility that something unexpected might happen, that nature might assert its own will against human intention, that life might surprise you with its tenacity or fragility or simple refusal to conform to your expectations. In the center of the gardens stands a fountain whose waters flow in patterns that tell the story of all the tears that have ever been shed, tears of joy and sorrow, of relief and disappointment, of love discovered and love lost. The water catches the eternal light and throws it back in rainbows that would blind mortal eyes with their perfection, but divine eyes see every color, every pattern, every possible refraction of light through liquid crystal. The fountain speaks in the voice of water itself, singing the song of all the rain that has ever fallen, all the rivers that have ever flowed, all the oceans that have ever rolled their waves against mortal shores. But the song, however beautiful, is always the same song, and even the most perfect music becomes noise when it never ends and never varies. Standing in these gardens of memory, surrounded by perfect beauty that has lost its power to inspire you, understand something fundamental about the nature of immortal existence. That paradise is only paradise when you can leave it. That perfection is only meaningful when imperfection is possible. That eternal beauty becomes eternal prison when it cannot change or grow or die. In Athena's hall of wisdom, mirrors line the walls like windows into infinite understanding, each one reflecting not just images, but the essential reality that lies beneath all surface appearances. The mirrors themselves are marvels of divine craftsmanship, their surfaces polished to such perfection they seem to exist in multiple dimensions, simultaneously showing not just what is, but what was, what could be, and what must inevitably come to pass. You gaze into these mirrors, seeking something you cannot name. Perhaps surprise, perhaps mystery, perhaps simply the comfort of not knowing everything that can be known. Your reflection stares back, but it is not quite the reflection you expect, not quite the divine image that mortals imagine when they picture the gods in their perfect glory. This version of yourself holds eyes that have seen too much, carries shoulders that bear the weight of endless responsibility, wears an expression of patient endurance that you did not know you possessed, but recognize as completely accurate. The mirrors show truth in all its forms, beautiful truth and ugly truth, comforting truth and terrible truth, truth that elevates and truth that destroys. But when you possess infinite knowledge, truth loses its power to shock or illuminate or transform, becoming simply another category of information to be cataloged and filed away in the vast library of immortal consciousness. The mirrors reveal everything, but revelation requires ignorance to have meaning, and divine beings possess no ignorance to be overcome. Each mirror displays a different aspect of reality, and as you move through the hall, the reflections create a kaleidoscope of possible perspectives on the same essential facts. In one mirror, you see the universe as cosmic mathematics, with every relationship between all things expressed in equations of such beauty and complexity they would drive mortal mathematicians to ecstasy. In another, you see reality as pure energy, matter, dissolving into waves and particles that dance in patterns of force and attraction and repulsion. A third mirror shows the universe as story, with every event connected to every other event in a vast narrative that has no beginning or end, but simply is eternally unfolding and eternally complete. A fourth reveals reality as music, with galaxies spinning in harmonious rhythms and particles vibrating at frequencies that create the cosmic symphony of existence itself. Each perspective is true, each contains the complete truth, and each cancels out all the others in the paradox of infinite understanding. The mirrors show not just what is, but what was and what will be, and the three temporal states blur together in the divine perspective that sees all time as a single eternal moment. You watch civilizations rise and fall like waves on a beach, each one thinking itself permanent, each one contributing its small note to the vast symphony of cosmic development before fading back into the silence from which it emerged. Mortal lives flicker past like candle flames in the wind, each one brief and bright and precious in its very fragility. You see the complete life stories of billions of individuals compressed into moments of viewing: birth, childhood, learning, love work, family, age, death, and the pattern repeats endlessly with variations so subtle they might as well be identical. The infinite creativity of mortal existence, when viewed from the perspective of immortal time, becomes a vast repetition of the same basic themes played out in countless minor keys. You watch the endless cycle of birth and death and rebirth that gives meaning to existence precisely because it ends, and you feel the weight of your own immortality as a burden rather than a gift. The mortals who live and die and are forgotten find meaning in their brevity, purpose in their limitations, beauty in their impermanence. Their lives matter precisely because they do not last forever, because each choice has consequences that cannot be undone because time is scarce enough to be valuable. Athena sits at her great desk, which is carved from a single piece of crystallized thought and inlaid with symbols that represent every concept that has ever been conceived. Her quill moves across papyrus with the fluid precision of someone who has been writing for eternity, recording in books that contain all knowledge that ever was or ever could be. The scratch of her pen on papyrus is rhythmic, hypnotic, the sound of someone recording truth with the patience of eternity, but without the hope that truth will prove useful. Her owl perches nearby, its golden eyes reflecting the lamplight with intelligence that transcends the merely wise. The owl sees with divine clarity, but its gaze holds the same patient fatigue that characterizes all immortal consciousness, the weariness that comes from understanding everything and finding that understanding provides no comfort, no purpose, no reason to continue understanding, except that understanding is what divine consciousness does. The books that Athena writes grow ever larger, but never more meaningful. Each page contains perfect knowledge, perfectly expressed, but knowledge without the possibility of ignorance is like light without the possibility of darkness. It illuminates nothing because there is nothing hidden to be revealed. The pursuit of wisdom becomes mechanical when all wisdom is already known, and the love of learning becomes impossible when there is nothing left to learn. You ask her what she writes, and she looks up with eyes that hold the accumulated weight of all the wisdom mortals have ever sought from her. The same story, she says, her voice carrying the faint rasp of someone who has spoken every word that can be spoken. The story of mortals who seek truth and find it too late, who gain wisdom only after they no longer need it, who understand the nature of existence only when existence is about to end. The irony is not lost on either of you. The goddess of wisdom, recording the futility of wisdom, the divine embodiment of learning, documenting the ultimate meaninglessness of knowledge. The mortals pray to her for understanding, and she provides it, but the understanding they gain often brings them sorrow rather than joy, answers that create more questions, solutions that reveal the extent of problems they never knew existed. The mirrors reflect her words back in visual form, images of philosophers contemplating questions they will never fully answer their minds. Brilliant but limited, their insights valuable but incomplete. Scientists discover principles that only lead to deeper mysteries, each answer revealing a dozen new questions, each solution creating new problems to be solved. Artists create beauty that captures something essential about life, precisely because their own lives are temporary, their works precious, because the hands that made them will return to dust. In the divine realm, where all questions have answers and all mysteries are solved, wisdom becomes simply another form of burden. To know everything is to understand that knowledge, without the possibility of surprise, is not wisdom, but simply information. That truth, without the possibility of error, is not revelation, but merely data. That understanding, without the possibility of misunderstanding, is not insight, but just description. You study your reflection in the mirror of truth, and see not a God, but a prisoner of perfection, locked in the golden cage of divine existence, longing for the beautiful uncertainty that makes mortal life precious. The mirror shows you everything you are, and everything you will always be. And in that complete revelation, you understand why mortals sometimes prefer comfortable illusions to uncomfortable truths. The Hall of Mirrors becomes a metaphor for divine consciousness itself, infinite perspectives on the same unchanging reality, perfect understanding that provides no satisfaction, complete knowledge that offers no wisdom. You are surrounded by truth in all its forms, but truth without the possibility of falsehood is like a question without the possibility of different answers. Technically perfect, but existentially meaningless. In the end, the mirrors show you the cruelest truth of all, that truth itself is not enough, that knowledge without the possibility of ignorance provides no comfort, that understanding everything means understanding nothing that matters. The divine curse is not ignorance, but its opposite, knowing too much, seeing too clearly, understanding too completely, to find wonder or surprise or meaning in existence. The prayers rise from the mortal world like smoke from 1,000 altars, and you feel them settling on your divine consciousness with the weight of infinite need, pressing against the boundaries, finite ability to respond. Each prayer adds another thread to the vast web of supplication that connects the divine realm to mortal existence, another voice to the cosmic chorus of wanting that never stops singing and never finds satisfaction in any answer that can be given. They come in waves that follow the rhythm of mortal desperation, stronger during times of war, famine, plague, and natural disaster, gentler during periods of peace and prosperity, but never entirely absent, because mortal existence always contains enough uncertainty to generate hope for divine intervention. The prayers carry the hopes and fears and desperate desires of beings who measure their lives in heartbeats, who face death as a constant possibility who experience want and loss and limitation as the fundamental conditions of existence. Each prayer is beautiful in its humanity, touching in its vulnerability, heartbreaking in its faith, that someone divine is listening and caring and capable of providing what mortal effort cannot achieve. They arrive like delicate flowers made of crystallized longing, each one unique in its specific need, yet identical in its essential nature, as a request for the impossible, for the universe to be other than what it is, for natural laws to bend to personal necessity, for cosmic forces to care about individual welfare. A farmer in Thessaly prays for rain, while a potter in Corinth begs for sunshine to dry his wares, and both prayers arrive simultaneously with equal urgency and equal validity. A mother pleads for her child's recovery, while a soldier asks for victory that will orphan another mother's child, and both requests carry the same weight of genuine need and desperate hope. The prayers contradict each other, cancel each other's, outcreate impossible demands that no amount of divine power can reconcile. Without choosing some mortals over others, you feel the weight of their wanting pressing against your consciousness like physical pressure, each prayer a small stone added to a mountain of obligation that grows heavier with each passing moment. The accumulated mass of mortal need threatens to crush divine consciousness under its collective weight, yet divine consciousness is strong enough to bear any burden, and therefore condemned to carry them all. The mathematics of prayer are impossible to solve. For every wish granted, 10 others must be denied. For every miracle performed, 100 natural laws must be bent or broken. For every intervention that helps one person, consequences ripple outward in patterns too complex for even divine wisdom to fully predict. The universe operates according to principles that ensure overall balance and cosmic harmony. But individual prayers ask for exceptions to those principles, for personal exemptions from the laws that govern all existence. Some prayers are whispered with the practiced cadence of ritual empty words repeated, because repetition itself has become a form of comfort rather than communication. These prayers carry no real expectation of answer, serving instead as meditation, as psychological coping mechanism, as connection to tradition and community, rather than actual attempt to influence divine behavior. They form a background hum of spiritual static that requires no response, because none is genuinely sought. Others carry the raw urgency of genuine desperation. A child lost in the woods as darkness falls, a ship caught in an unexpected storm with family members aboard a plague spreading through the narrow streets of a city where doctors can offer no cure. These prayers have texture and weight that the ritual ones lack, but they are also the hardest to bear because they remind you of what you once cared about enough to answer when divine intervention seemed like gift rather than interference. In the beginning, you answered every prayer you could, bending the rules of nature to provide the rain and sunshine and healing that mortals requested. Each miracle felt like an act of love, a demonstration of divine care for beings whose lives were brief and difficult and filled with suffering that could be alleviated through the simple application of cosmic power. The grateful tears of mortals who received divine help provided satisfaction that made immortal existence feel meaningful. But each intervention created 10 new problems. Each miracle demanded 100 more. And eventually, you learned the bitter mathematics of divine intervention. No amount of help is ever enough, and every gift comes with a price that someone else must pay. The rain that saves one farmer's crops creates floods that destroy another's house. The healing that saves one child's life allows them to grow up to become a tyrant who causes thousands to suffer. The victory that protects one city leads to the destruction of another. More troubling still, the mortals who received divine intervention often became dependent on it, losing the resilience and resourcefulness that made them admirable in the first place. Cities that relied on divine protection became weak and corrupt, unable to defend themselves. When the gods grew tired of constant vigilance, individuals who expected miraculous healing stopped taking care of their health, believing that divine power would always be available to correct their mistakes. The prayers began to change as well, becoming more demanding, more entitled, less grateful. Instead of humble requests for assistance, they became angry demands for service, bitter complaints. When divine intervention did not arrive quickly enough or completely enough to satisfy mortal expectations, the mortals began to think of gods as cosmic servants rather than awesome forces to be approached with reverence and humility. Now you listen to the prayers with the patient endurance of someone who understands that being heard is sometimes more important than being answered. The sound of mortal voices raised in supplication becomes a kind of music, not beautiful exactly, but deeply human in its mixture of hope and fear and stubborn refusal to accept the world as it is. The prayers express something essential about mortal nature, the capacity to imagine that things could be better, the determination to ask for help, even when help seems unlikely, the faith that someone somewhere cares about individual suffering. You have learned to appreciate prayers for what they are, rather than for what they request, expressions of the human spirit that refuses to surrender to limitation, demonstrations of the imagination that can conceive of existence better than what is currently available, evidence of the love that motivates mortals to seek help, not just for themselves, but for others they care about. The weight of prayers no longer crushes you because you have learned to carry it differently, not as obligation to answer, but as witness to the beauty of mortal hope, not as demand for action, but as song of beings who continue to believe in the possibility of wonder despite living in a universe that provides little evidence for such belief. The prayers become a form of worship, not because they expect answers, but because they demonstrate the essential nobility of consciousness that refuses to accept despair as the final word. Religious systems have grown up around your name complex hierarchies of belief and practice that interpret divine will through human understanding that can never fully grasp the reality of immortal existence. Priests speak in your name claiming authority. They do not possess promising interventions. You cannot provide building temples that enshrine misunderstanding in marble and gold. The gap between what mortals believe about gods and what gods actually experience grows wider with each passing century. But even the misunderstanding is beautiful, in its way evidence of the mortal capacity to create meaning from mystery, to build hope from uncertainty, to find comfort in the idea that someone divine cares about their welfare, even when divine care cannot manifest as direct intervention. The prayers continue to rise like incense, carrying with them the essential fragrance of mortal hope, and you receive them not as demands to be fulfilled, but as gifts to be treasured, evidence that consciousness exists in the universe that is capable of love, capable of caring about something beyond itself, capable of believing in goodness despite overwhelming evidence of cosmic indifference. Apollo's lyre rings out across the marble halls with notes of mathematical precision, each sound perfectly calculated to embody the pure relationships between frequencies that make harmony possible. But the music it makes is the music of perfect repetition rather than creative inspiration. Every note, precisely placed according to divine understanding of acoustic principles rather than emerging from any emotional need to express something that cannot be expressed in any other way. The melodies he plays are masterpieces of divine composition, technically flawless and aesthetically unassailable. But they say nothing new, because there is nothing new to say when you possess complete knowledge of all possible musical relationships. Every harmony has been explored. Every melodic possibility has been realized. Every rhythmic pattern has been perfected until music becomes simply the mechanical reproduction of mathematical relationships rather than the spontaneous expression of consciousness trying to communicate something essential about existence. You listen with the attention that duty demands, but your mind wanders to the memory of when music could surprise you, when Apollo's playing could move mountains, not through the application of divine power, but through the sheer beauty of sounds that had never been heard before, that emerged from the intersection of skill and inspiration and the divine spark that transforms technique into art. Now, his playing has the mechanical precision of someone going through motions that have long since lost their meaning. The techniques are still flawless, the execution still perfect, but the soul that once animated the music has been worn away by endless repetition until only the form remains. Apollo plays because that is what Apollo does not, because music serves any purpose, or provides any satisfaction, or connects him to anything larger than himself. The lyre responds to his touch with perfect obedience, producing exactly the sounds he intends, but the music that emerges lacks the essential unpredictability that makes art meaningful. The other gods provide accompaniment in the orchestra of eternal sameness, each contributing their own perfectly executed part to a symphony that has been playing for so long, no one remembers why it started or when it might end. Ares polishes his armor with strokes that ring out in metronomic rhythm, the bronze responding to his touch with clear tones that mark time in a realm where time has no meaning. The sound of his maintenance ritual is hypnotic in its regularity. Strike buff, strike buff, strike buff. Each repetition identical to the last, each producing the same bright note of metal on metal. His armor needs no polishing because divine materials do not tarnish or wear, but the routine provides structure in an existence that admits no other form of organization. The polishing becomes meditation. The The repetition becomes prayer. The meaningless activity becomes meaningful simply because it provides something to do with immortal consciousness that has no other outlet. Artemis draws and releases her bowstring in a pattern that has not varied for eons, the silver cord singing with pure notes that cut through the air like crystallized moonlight. Each draw produces exactly the same tension. Each release generates exactly the same tone. Each arrow, though no arrows are actually nocked, would fly exactly the same trajectory if arrows were present to be shot. The hunting goddess practices her art in a realm where there is nothing to hunt, perfecting skills that can find no application, maintaining abilities that serve no purpose. The sound of her bowstring becomes part of the eternal composition, a percussive element that provides rhythmic structure to the larger symphony of divine routine. But percussion without purpose is just noise, however beautiful, and rhythm without destination is simply marking time until time loses all meaning. Hephaestus pounds his hammer against an anvil that never produces anything but the perfect ring of divine bronze. On divine bronze, the sound echoing through the halls, with the authority of cosmic force applied to cosmic resistance. His strikes are timed to create complex rhythmic patterns that would impress mortal musicians with their sophistication. But the complexity serves no function except to demonstrate that even divine smithing can be elevated to the level of art when it is divorced from any practical purpose. The hammer rises and falls with mechanical precision, each blow exactly calculated to produce the desired acoustic effect, each strike perfectly placed to maintain the overall harmonic structure of the divine symphony. But smithing without creation is merely an elaborate form of drumming, and even the most skillful drumming becomes monotonous when it continues for eons without variation or purpose. Each sound is beautiful in isolation, demonstrating the perfect control that divine beings exercise over their chosen domains, but together they create a symphony of monotony that perfectly captures the essence of immortal existence. The music is technically perfect, acoustically sophisticated, mathematically beautiful, and completely empty of the spontaneous joy that makes music meaningful. You remember when Apollo's music could move mountains, when his songs could inspire mortal poets to create works that would outlast empires, when divine art had the power to transform both creator and audience. Now, the music serves only as background to existence pleasant enough, but lacking the power to inspire or transform or even hold attention for more than brief moments. The acoustics of Olympus are perfect, designed to carry sound with crystalline clarity to every corner of the divine realm. Every whisper becomes audible, every sigh magnified, every breath turned into part of the eternal composition of immortal existence. There is no privacy in perfection, no space for the quiet moments that give meaning to the loud ones, no acoustic shadows where consciousness might find respite from the constant performance of divine perfection. Even silence becomes another instrument in the symphony, its presence as carefully orchestrated as any note. The pauses between sounds are calculated for maximum aesthetic impact. The spaces between notes designed to create tension and release according to mathematical principles that govern cosmic harmony. But orchestrated silence is not the same as natural quiet, and calculated pauses cannot provide the spontaneous rest that consciousness needs to remain fresh and alert, you close your eyes and try to hear something beyond the surface beauty of divine music, some imperfection that might hint at the possibility of change, some flaw that might crack open into something new, some mistake that might suggest that even gods are not completely trapped by their own perfection. But there is nothing. The music continues with the inexorable precision of celestial mechanics, beautiful and empty and eternal. And yet, within that emptiness, you sometimes hear echoes of something else, the ghost of spontaneity, the shadow of passion, the faint memory of what music was like when it was created rather than simply performed. These moments are brief and precious flickerings of warmth. In the cold perfection of divine art, reminders that even in the golden cage of immortal existence, something essential continues to exist, even when it cannot find full expression. The symphony of monotony plays on marking the passage of time that has no meaning, providing structure to existence that needs no structure, creating beauty that serves no purpose except to demonstrate that divine beings can create beauty, even when beauty provides no satisfaction. In the end, the music becomes simply another perfect thing in a realm where perfection is the only possibility, and perfection is its own form of prison. You participate in the daily ritual of forgetting what cannot be forgotten, and the very impossibility of the task makes it sacred in the way that only divine impossibilities can be sacred. It is a complex ceremony that requires all the gods to gather in the great amphitheater of memory, a structure carved from crystallized time itself, where towering shelves hold every moment that has ever occurred, preserved in perfect clarity, like insects trapped in amber. The amphitheater curves around you with geometric precision, its acoustics calculated to ensure that every word spoken from the central stage reaches every listener with perfect clarity. The shelves that line the walls rise to impossible heights, filled with memory crystals that glow with soft light, each one containing a complete sensory and emotional record of a single moment in cosmic history. The collection is infinite, growing constantly as new moments are added, but never becoming disorganized, because divine archival systems admit no chaos. The memories are crystallized in forms that capture not just events, but the full experience of each instant. The smell of rain on summer earth during the first storm that ever fell, the feel of a mortal's tears on divine skin when you first chose to comfort rather than command, the sound of laughter that once held genuine joy before joy became another perfect thing that lost its power to inspire wonder. Each crystal contains enough sensory information to overwhelm mortal consciousness, but divine awareness can process infinite detail without difficulty. The ritual begins with Zeus reading from the scroll of significant moments, his voice echoing off the curved walls as he recites the catalog of events that shaped the cosmos, creation myths and cosmic disasters, the birth and death of stars, the rise and fall of civilizations, the moment when consciousness first emerged from matter and began to contemplate its own existence, all reduced to entries in an eternal ledger that grows longer but never more meaningful. His words carry no emotion because emotion would make the remembering unbearable, and the ritual is designed to transform memory from experience into information, from lived reality into cataloged data. The scroll itself is written in divine script that captures not just the facts of what happened, but the essential significance of each event, its relationship to all other events, its consequences both immediate and ultimate. But significance, when it encompasses everything, signifies nothing, and ultimate consequences lose their meaning when you can see the complete pattern of cause and effect stretching across infinite time. Zeus reads with the mechanical precision of someone performing a necessary function rather than sharing meaningful information, his voice steady and clear and completely empty of the wonder that such events should inspire. Hera adds her own commentary, noting the personal betrayals and family dramas that punctuate the grand cosmic narrative, like discordant notes in an otherwise harmonious composition. Her voice is steady as she recounts Zeus's various infidelities, but you see the way her hands grip the arms of her throne and know that perfect memory is not always a divine blessing. To remember everything with perfect clarity means that no wound ever truly heals, no slight ever truly fades, no pain ever diminishes with the passage of time. Mortal memory is merciful in its imprecision, softening the sharp edges of painful experiences, allowing happy memories to glow brighter, while difficult ones fade into manageable shadows. But divine memory preserves everything with equal clarity, making the pain of ancient betrayals as fresh as if they happened moments ago, keeping old grievances alive across eons of time until they become permanent features of immortal consciousness. She speaks of divine marriages as cosmic necessities rather than personal relationships of love, as political alliance rather than emotional connection of family bonds, as obligations to maintain cosmic order rather than expressions of genuine affection. Her words transform the personal into the institutional, the emotional into the political, the meaningful into the merely functional. You contribute your own memories to the ritual, speaking them aloud to transform them from personal experience into shared knowledge, hoping that making them public will somehow diminish their private power. The first time you felt the weight of prayer settling on your consciousness like a physical burden, the moment you realized that immortality was a trap rather than a gift, that eternal existence meant eternal repetition rather than eternal growth, the day you understood that perfection and beauty were not the same thing, that flawless execution was not equivalent to meaningful expression. Speaking the memories aloud should diminish their emotional impact, should transform them from lived experience into mere information, should provide the distance that comes from objectification. But the alchemy of forgetting never quite works as intended, and the memories remain as vivid and painful as ever, despite being shared with others who understand their weight. The ritual includes a formal recitation of all the things that gods have tried to forget: the loneliness of perfection, the burden of omniscience, the meaninglessness of eternal existence, the way infinite time makes all experiences equivalent and therefore meaningless. Each god contributes to this litany of divine suffering, adding their voice to the cosmic complaint that no one can hear except other gods who face the same impossible existence. The amphitheater fills with the sound of divine voices speaking the same truths that have been spoken countless times before, creating a harmony of shared misery that is beautiful in its precision but hopeless in its content. The words echo off the crystallized time that forms the walls, coming back multiplied and distorted until the air fills with overlapping voices saying the same things in slightly different ways. The ritual concludes with a moment of silence in which all the gods attempt to release their attachment to the memories they have just shared, to let go of experiences that cannot be changed, to find peace with the unchangeable nature of divine existence. It is meant to be a cleansing, a way of acknowledging the past without being imprisoned by it, a technique for achieving the serenity that comes from accepting what cannot be altered. But divine memory is too perfect, too complete, too permanently etched into immortal consciousness to be erased by ritual or intention or even genuine desire to forget. The silence that follows the recitation is heavy with the weight of unchanged experience, thick with the accumulated mass of perfect recollection that admits no editing, no softening, no merciful blurring of sharp edges. You leave the amphitheater carrying exactly the same burden you brought to it, but somehow the shared acknowledgement of that burden makes it fractionally easier to bear. The ritual of forgetting accomplishes nothing except to remind you that you are not alone in your inability to forget, that the weight of perfect memory is shared among all divine beings, that the burden of immortal existence is distributed across multiple consciousness, even when it cannot be reduced. The ritual itself becomes another memory to be preserved with perfect clarity. The 10,000th time you have participated in the attempt to forget the countless identical ceremonies that have achieved nothing except the demonstration that even gods cannot escape the prison of their own consciousness. But even this failure provides a strange comfort evidence that divine perfection has limits, that there are some problems that cannot be solved even by unlimited power and infinite wisdom. In the end, the ritual of forgetting serves a purpose different from its stated intention, not to achieve forgetting, but to create community around the shared impossibility of forgetting, not to eliminate painful memories, but to acknowledge that pain is a fundamental condition of consciousness, even divine consciousness. The ceremony becomes a form of divine communion, a way of existing together in the face of unbearable perfection, a shared ritual that creates meaning through repetition, even when repetition is all that divine existence allows. Sleep, when it comes to immortal beings, is not the restful oblivion that mortals know, but a strange state of suspended awareness in which consciousness continues, but takes on different forms, like light passing through a prism and separating into component colors that were always present but hidden in the unified beam. You dream, but your dreams are not the chaotic fantasies of mortal sleep. They are perfect ordered experiences that feel more real than reality itself, more meaningful than waking existence, more true than truth. The transition into divine sleep is gradual consciousness slowly releasing its grip on the immediate present and allowing itself to drift into alternative configurations of awareness. There is no sudden break between waking and sleeping, no moment of unconsciousness that marks the boundary between one state and another. Instead, awareness simply shifts from one perfect state to another perfect state, like changing the focus of an infinitely sophisticated instrument that can examine reality at any level of detail. Tonight, you dream of being mortal, and the dream unfolds with such complete sensory detail that for the duration of the experience, you forget that you have ever been anything else. In this dream, you wake in a simple bed in a modest house, and your body aches with the beautiful pain of muscles that have worked and aged joints that bear the accumulated weight of years, lived in linear time bones that remember every fall and every effort and every moment of simple physical existence. Your hands in the dream show the marks of time and labor, calluses earned through the repetition of necessary tasks, small scars that tell stories of effort and risk, and the thousand small accidents that make life precious because it can be lost. The skin is rough in places, soft in others, marked by the sun and wind and water that shaped it through decades of exposure to natural forces that divine skin never experiences. The house around you is imperfect in ways that make it beautiful. Walls that are not quite straight floors, that creak under your weight windows, that fit their frames imprecisely and allow small drafts of outside air to enter. The imperfections are not flaws, but evidence of human creation, proof that the structure was built by beings who tried their best with limited materials and finite skill, and created something that serves its purpose while admitting its limitations. In the dream, you experience hunger, not the artificial appetite that divine existence sometimes mimics, but real hunger that gnaws at your belly and makes your hands shake slightly, that gives simple food the power to provide genuine satisfaction. The bread you eat in the dream tastes of grain that grew in actual soil, shaped by weather that followed natural patterns, harvested by hands that needed the work to survive. Each bite carries the flavor of earth and rain and sunshine and human effort, complex tastes that nourish not just the body, but the soul that understands scarcity. The urgency of time passing fills every moment of the dream with significance that immortal existence lacks. Each day used is a day that cannot be reclaimed. Each choice made eliminates other possibilities that will never return. Each moment wasted reduces the finite store of moments that mortal existence allows. This limitation gives weight and meaning to every decision, makes every experience precious, because it occurs within the context of scarcity that creates value. You dream of love that is complicated by mortality, passionate because it cannot last, precious because it can be lost, meaningful because it exists despite the certainty of eventual separation. In the dream, you hold someone whose heart beats against your chest, and you can feel the life pulsing through their veins, fragile and temporary, and infinitely valuable. Because of its fragility, the love is not perfect, not eternal, not guaranteed, and therefore completely real in ways that divine love can never be. The beloved in your dream ages as you watch, and the aging is beautiful because it marks the passage of shared time, evidence of years spent together, proof that love can endure, even as the bodies that contain it change and weaken and prepare for the ending that gives mortal existence its poignancy. The lines around their eyes become maps of laughter, shared the gray in their hair becomes evidence of wisdom earned through experience. The slowness of their movements becomes testimony to a life fully lived. The dream takes you through a single mortal day, but that day contains more genuine experience than eons of divine existence. Every moment is sharp with the clarity that comes from scarcity. The morning light looks different when you know it will fade. Food tastes better when you might not have enough conversations, carry more weight when time is limited, and words must be chosen carefully because they cannot be taken back. Work in the dream is meaningful because it serves purposes beyond itself, providing food for the family, shelter from the elements, contribution to a community that depends on individual effort for collective survival. The labor is difficult sometimes, painful, but it connects you to something larger than yourself, makes you part of systems of mutual dependence that create meaning through interdependence. Even pain has a beauty in the dream because it is temporary, because it will pass, because surviving it proves that you are alive and resilient and capable of endurance. The pain serves biological purposes, warning of danger, encouraging rest when rest is needed, providing contrast that makes pleasure more intense when it arrives. It is pain with meaning, limitation, with purpose, suffering that serves life rather than simply existing as the byproduct of consciousness that cannot be turned off. You wake from the dream with tears on your divine cheeks, salt water that should not exist in the perfect realm of Olympus but somehow does, as if your immortal body remembers what it was like to need, to want to fear loss, to experience the beautiful intensity that comes from knowing that everything precious is also temporary. The tears are impossible according to divine physiology, but they exist nonetheless, evidence that some part of immortal consciousness yearns for the meaningful limitations of mortal existence. The tears dry quickly in the eternal air of paradise, but the ache they represent lingers long after the dream has ended. It is an ache for mortality, for the beautiful fragility that makes love precious and time valuable and existence meaningful. It is longing for the very limitations that mortal prayers ask to be removed. Nostalgia for experiences you have never actually had, but somehow understand completely. The dream lingers in divine memory with perfect clarity, as vivid as any actual experience, but its power comes not from its reality, but from its impossibility. It represents everything that immortal existence lacks: surprise, urgency, meaning derived from limitation, beauty that emerges from imperfection, love that grows stronger through the knowledge that it cannot last forever. In the aftermath of the dream, waking existence feels more empty than usual, perfection more oppressive, eternity more like a prison than a paradise. The dream serves as a reminder of what was lost when mortality was transcended, what was sacrificed when perfection was achieved, what was given up when divine existence was chosen or imposed. But the dream also provides a form of hope. evidence that even divine consciousness retains the capacity to imagine alternatives to its current state, proof that the yearning for meaningful existence continues even in the perfect realm, where meaning seems impossible to find. The dream suggests that somewhere within immortal consciousness, the possibility of transformation remains hidden, but not destroyed by eons of unchanging perfection. The distances between the divine palaces are measured not in steps, but in degrees of isolation, and you walk the marble paths that connect the scattered residences of immortal beings with the slow pace of someone who knows that arrival will bring no more satisfaction than departure. Each footfall echoes with the sound of solitude, made audible the percussion of perfect feet on perfect stone, creating rhythms that mark time in a realm where time serves no function except to provide the illusion of progress toward destinations that offer no destination. The paths themselves are masterpieces of divine engineering, their surfaces smooth as mirrors and strong enough to bear the weight of cosmic forces, their edges sharp as mathematical principles drawn in three-dimensional space. They wind through landscapes that follow aesthetic principles, so sophisticated they would drive mortal artists to despair, connecting architectural marvels that embody the perfect intersection of beauty and function. But perfection in design cannot remedy imperfection in purpose, and even the most beautiful path leads only from one form of loneliness to another. The gardens that line the pathways bloom with flowers that know no seasons, trees that bear fruit, eternally grass that grows to exactly the right height and remains there without cutting or care. The landscaping follows divine geometry that creates perfect harmonies of color and texture and form, but harmony without discord becomes monotony, and beauty without the possibility of ugliness loses its power to inspire wonder. You walk through paradise and feel like an exile from some place you have never been, but know must exist, somewhere imperfect enough to be beautiful, somewhere mortal enough to be meaningful. Artemis has withdrawn to the furthest reaches of Olympus, where her palace sits among groves of silver trees that bear no fruit and cast no shadow, because shadow would imply imperfection in the light that illuminates them. The distance to her domain is not great in physical terms. Divine beings can traverse any distance instantly if they choose, but it requires crossing vast expanses of emotional space that separate immortal consciousness from immortal consciousness, like invisible oceans too wide to bridge. Her palace is built from moonstone that captures and reflects the light of every moon that has ever shone, its walls glowing with soft radiance that creates beauty without warmth, illumination without comfort. The architecture follows the curves of natural forms, shells and bones and ice formations, but translated into permanent materials that will never change or decay or surprise anyone with unexpected beauty. It is a structure designed for solitude, with rooms that accommodate only one occupant, windows that look outward rather than inward, spaces that encourage contemplation of distance rather than intimacy. She moves through her domain with the fluid grace of eternal hunting, but there is no prey here worthy of divine attention, no challenge that can engage immortal skills, no purpose that can justify the elaborate rituals of tracking and stalking and striking that once gave her existence meaning. Her hounds follow her in perfect formation, their breath misting in air that is always the precise temperature of autumn dawn, and their loyalty is absolute but empty because they are constructs of divine will rather than living beings capable of choice. The hounds are beautiful, perfectly proportioned, ideally suited to their function as hunting companions, but they cannot provide the companionship that their loyalty seems to promise. They respond to her commands with flawless obedience, but obedience without the possibility of disobedience is not relationship, but simply mechanism. Their devotion is programmed rather than chosen, and therefore meaningless in the way that all perfect things become meaningless when perfection is the only possibility. You find her standing at the edge of the great precipice that marks the boundary between divine and mortal realms, looking down at the world below with eyes that hold the accumulated weight of all the hunts that have lost their meaning. The precipice drops away into distances that even divine vision cannot fully measure, and the mortal world spreads below like a vast tapestry woven from threads of every color imaginable, constantly changing as weather and seasons and the activities of billions of individual lives create patterns too complex for any single consciousness to fully comprehend. She speaks without turning her voice, carrying the loneliness of someone who has chosen isolation but cannot escape the need for connection that defines conscious existence. The words emerge from her lips like arrows shot into empty air perfectly, aimed but striking no target, beautiful in their precision, but futile in their purpose. They still pray to me, she says, gesturing toward the mortal world spread out below, like a living map of everything she has chosen to leave behind. Young girls asking for protection, hunters seeking success, women praying for strength. But they don't know what they're praying to. They think I'm fierce and independent and free, and I'm all those things, but I'm also... She pauses, searching for words to describe something that has no adequate expression in any language, divine or mortal, because language requires the possibility of communication, and true divine loneliness cannot be communicated even to other immortal beings. You supply the word she cannot say, lonely. The word hangs in the air between you like a bridge, spanning the gap between two forms of isolation, and she nods with the slow movement of someone who has found recognition in an unexpected place. The gesture contains centuries of unspoken understanding, acknowledgement of the fundamental truth that connects all divine beings despite their individual domains and separate responsibilities. They are alone together, isolated by the very perfection that makes them gods. In the mortal world, loneliness is a temporary condition, a problem to be solved through human connection or meaningful work, or the creation of family or community. It has causes that can be identified and addressed, solutions that can be attempted, hope for resolution through change in circumstances or attitude or behavior. But divine loneliness is an essential quality of immortal existence, as fundamental as eternal life itself, because perfection admits no genuine relationship with anything imperfect, and all other divine beings are simply variations on the same impossible theme. The geography of Olympus reflects this truth in its architecture, and urban planning. Each palace is perfectly positioned to provide privacy and solitude, separated by enough distance to ensure that divine beings can exist without interference from their peers. The spacing follows aesthetic principles that create visual harmony when viewed from cosmic distances, but this careful positioning also ensures that every god lives in a beautiful bubble of isolation surrounded by perfect beauty and perfect silence and perfect crushing solitude. Gardens and parks provide transitional spaces between the divine residences, but they are designed for individual contemplation rather than social interaction. The paths that connect different areas are wide enough for single travelers, but discourage group movement, winding through landscapes that inspire introspection rather than conversation. Even the few communal spaces, the great throne room, the amphitheater of memory, the halls where formal gatherings occur, are arranged to maintain the essential isolation of each participant rather than creating genuine community. Poseidon's palace floats on an eternal sea that reflects every ocean that has ever existed, its waters carrying the combined memories of all the storms and calms and tides that have shaped mortal coastlines. But the sea is empty of life, except for what he creates through divine will, and created life cannot provide the genuine surprise and challenge that natural life offers. He rules over vast domains of water that span multiple dimensions, but he rules alone, his power absolute, and his isolation complete. Apollo's domain blazes with the light of every sun that has ever burned, a complex of crystalline structures that capture and refract cosmic illumination into patterns of beauty that would blind mortal eyes. But light without darkness has no meaning. An illumination that reveals everything leaves nothing hidden to be discovered. He creates music that embodies perfect mathematical relationships. But mathematics without mystery cannot touch the heart, and perfection without the possibility of failure cannot inspire genuine appreciation. The loneliness that defines divine existence is not simply the absence of companionship, but the presence of perfection that makes companionship impossible. Gods cannot surprise each other because divine knowledge encompasses all possibilities. They cannot support each other because divine power admits no weakness. They cannot learn from each other because divine wisdom is complete and identical across all immortal consciousness. The relationships that exist among the gods are formal rather than intimate, based on cosmic necessity rather than genuine affection, structured by the roles they play in maintaining universal order rather than by personal choice or emotional connection. They interact because interaction is part of the system they collectively maintain, not because they find pleasure or meaning or comfort in each other's company. Standing at the edge of the precipice with Artemis, looking down at the mortal world, where genuine relationship is possible, because beings are imperfect enough to need each other, you understand that the geography of loneliness extends far beyond the physical arrangement of divine palaces. It is mapped in the spaces between consciousness that cannot be bridged by any amount of power or wisdom or time, charted in the distances between beings who are too perfect to touch each other's essential reality. The loneliness is beautiful in its way, clean and pure, and undiluted by false hope or temporary comfort. It is the loneliness of mountain peaks that rise above all others, of stars that burn alone in the cosmic dark of consciousness that has transcended all limitations and therefore lost all possibilities for genuine connection. It is the price of perfection, the cost of immortality, the geography of divine existence mapped in the spaces between beings who are condemned to be forever separate despite their eternal togetherness. At the end of this day, that is like every other day, you return to your chamber with the slow steps of someone who has traveled infinite distances without moving, who has experienced everything and learned nothing, who has lived through eternity and somehow remained exactly the same as when eternity began. The familiar space welcomes you with its perfect proportions and flawless beauty, every object in exactly the same position it occupied yesterday and will occupy tomorrow, creating an environment so stable it becomes a form of sensory deprivation. You prepare for the sleep that will carry you into tomorrow's repetition of eternal sameness. But tonight something feels different, not changed exactly, because change is impossible in the realm of divine perfection, but somehow more visible, as if the very familiarity of your existence has worn away enough of its surface beauty to reveal the truth that lies beneath all the golden splendor and cosmic significance. The ritual of preparing for rest has become a meditation on the nature of permanence. Each gesture, repeated so many times, it has achieved the status of prayer through pure repetition. You remove the divine garments that never wrinkle or stain or wear out, folding them with the same precise movements you have used for millennia, placing them in the same position they have occupied since time began to have meaning. The fabric flows through your hands like liquid starlight, beautiful and perfect and eternally the same. Your reflection in the polished surfaces that line your chamber shows the same face you have worn since consciousness first emerged from cosmic chaos, unmarked by time or experience or the weight of infinite memory. The divine features are mathematically perfect, aesthetically ideal, emotionally neutral, a face designed to embody abstract beauty rather than express individual personality or accumulated wisdom or the marks that genuine experience leaves on consciousness that has truly lived. You stand before the great window that looks out over all creation, and you see it as if, for the first time, the terrible magnificence of a universe that continues to unfold and grow and change while you remain fixed in amber, perfection suspended in eternal stasis, while reality flows around you like water around stone. The view encompasses everything that exists or could exist, but viewing everything is like viewing nothing when perspective remains forever unchanged. Below, mortals are born and die, and love and suffer, and create and destroy, and their brief lives burn with the fierce intensity of things that know they cannot last. Each individual existence is a tiny flame that flickers for moments against the cosmic dark, but the accumulated light of billions of these brief fires creates an illumination more meaningful than all the perfect radiance of divine realms. Their mortality gives their choices weight, their limitations give their achievements meaning, their imperfection gives their love beauty that eternal perfection cannot match. Above stars are born in cosmic fire and die in spectacular collapse, and their destruction seeds the birth of new stars in an endless cycle of death and rebirth that gives meaning to existence precisely because it admits the possibility of ending. The dance of creation and destruction plays out across scales so vast that even immortal consciousness struggles to encompass them. But the essential truth remains the same. Meaning emerges from change, beauty from transience, significance from the possibility that things could be otherwise. And here, suspended between the mortal world below and the cosmic dance above you, exist in the golden cage of immortality, perfect and unchanging, and somehow less real than either the fragile humans or the dying stars. You have everything that mortals pray for: eternal life, infinite power, perfect beauty, absolute knowledge, and the having of it has taught you the cruelest truth of all, that these things are only valuable when they can be lost. The recognition that has been building throughout this eternal day crystallizes into something approaching understanding, not hope. Exactly because hope implies the possibility of change, but a different kind of peace. The peace that comes from accepting what cannot be altered, while finding within that acceptance a space for something that might be called contentment, or at least the absence of the desperate desire for things to be other than what they are. You are what you are, and you will be what you will be, and the eternal repetition of divine existence is both your prison and your purpose. The sameness that once felt like a curse now reveals itself as a different kind of blessing, not the blessing of constant improvement or endless discovery, but the blessing of reliability, of constancy, of being something solid and permanent in a universe where everything else is subject to change and decay and loss. You think of Hestia, who found meaning in tending the eternal flame, not because the flame needed tending, but because the tending itself became a form of love. Love without object, care without purpose, devotion without reward, except the simple satisfaction of maintaining something essential to the cosmic order. Her example suggests that meaning is not something you find, but something you create from the materials at hand, not something imposed from outside, but something that emerges from within when attention is paid with sufficient care and consistency. You think of Persephone, who discovered beauty in gardens where nothing grows, because the care itself was what mattered, not the growth. Her hands touching flowers that could not change her voice, speaking to plants that could not respond her presence, bringing something essential to a realm where presence was the only gift that could be given. The gardening became meaningful, not because it achieved anything, but because it was performed with complete attention and genuine care. You think of all the ways that immortal beings learn to live with the weight of forever, and you understand that meaning is not something that exists independently of consciousness, but something that consciousness creates through the quality of attention it brings to experience. The same perfect moment can be empty or full, depending not on its content, but on how it is approached, not on what it contains, but on what is brought to it. Tomorrow will be the same as today, and today was the same as yesterday, and this truth that once felt like a curse now feels like a different kind of blessing in the realm of perfect repetition. each moment becomes simultaneously eternal and precious. Eternal because it will never truly end. Precious because it contains within itself all the moments that came before and all the moments that will come after. The realization settles around you like a garment woven from acceptance itself, and you understand that divine existence is not about achieving something beyond what currently exists, but about finding within what exists the complete range of experience that consciousness can encompass. The perfection that seemed like limitation reveals itself as containing infinite depth when approached with the right quality of attention, infinite possibility when engaged with the right kind of care. You prepare for sleep with the same rituals you have performed for eons, but tonight each gesture feels deliberate rather than automatic, chosen rather than compelled, meaningful rather than merely habitual. The folding of divine robes becomes a meditation on the nature of order. The arrangement of objects becomes a study in the relationship between consciousness and environment. The final look in the mirror becomes an opportunity to see divine nature clearly without judgment or desire for change. The last thing you see before sleep takes you is the eternal flame that burns in the distance, Hestia's gift to all who dwell in Olympus, a reminder that even in the realm of gods, something must be tended, something must be cared for, something must be kept alive through the long watches of immortal night. The flame burns without fuel and without end, but it burns because someone chooses to keep it burning, and in that choice lies the closest thing to freedom that divine existence allows. The flame represents what remains when everything else has been perfected beyond the point of meaning. The simple act of paying attention, of caring for something beyond yourself, of maintaining through conscious choice what could exist through cosmic necessity, but becomes meaningful only when it is chosen rather than compelled. The eternal flame burns not because it must, but because Hestia decides each moment that it should, and in that decision lies the essence of what makes divine existence bearable. Despite its golden chains, sleep comes with the weight of eternity behind it and the promise of eternity ahead, and in the space between one eternal day and the next, you find the peace that comes from accepting the magnificent burden of being divine. The acceptance does not transform the burden into something else, does not make immortality less challenging or perfection more satisfying, but it does reveal that even the most impossible circumstances contain possibilities for creating meaning through the quality of consciousness brought to bear upon them. In the end, what remains is not hope for change, but appreciation for what exists, not desire for escape, but engagement with what is given, not the dream of being otherwise, but the reality of being exactly what you are with complete acceptance of all that entails. The divine consciousness that you carry is vast enough to contain contradictions that would shatter mortal minds. The simultaneous appreciation of beauty and awareness of its emptiness, the recognition of perfection and understanding of its limitations, the experience of eternity and acceptance of its weight. You are large enough to hold all these truths without requiring them to resolve into simple answers, complex enough to find meaning in meaninglessness, deep enough to discover satisfaction in the very absence of satisfaction, as sleep finally claims your immortal consciousness You carry with you the knowledge that tomorrow will bring the same golden light filtering through the same crystal windows, the same perfect temperature and eternal silence, the same gathering of divine beings performing the same perfect routines in the same flawless environment. But you also carry the understanding that this sameness is not emptiness, but fullness, not prison, but sanctuary, not curse, but the fundamental condition of existence that has learned to transcend the need for external validation. The prayers of the mortals will continue to rise like incense from the world below, carrying their hopes and fears and desperate desires into the divine realm where they settle like dew on consciousness that no longer struggles against the weight of infinite need. You will receive them not as demands to be fulfilled, but as gifts to be treasured, evidence that consciousness exists in the universe that is capable of hope, capable of reaching beyond itself, capable of believing in goodness, despite overwhelming evidence of cosmic indifference. Your fellow gods will continue their eternal routines. Zeus, contemplating with infinite patience, Hera, maintaining her careful dignity, Apollo, seeking the perfect note that transcends perfection itself, Artemis, walking her solitary paths through silver groves, Athena recording wisdom that serves no purpose except the recording itself. And you will join them in these routines, not because they lead anywhere, but because they are what divine beings do, because the doing itself becomes meaningful when it is undertaken with full awareness of its essential nature. The eternal flame will continue to burn in the distance, tended by Hestia's careful hands, fed by her deliberate choice to maintain what could exist without maintenance, but becomes sacred through the decision to care for it. The flame represents the irreducible core of what makes existence bearable, the simple act of paying attention, of choosing care over indifference, of creating meaning through the sheer persistence of consciousness that refuses to surrender to meaninglessness. In the growing darkness of divine night, you understand that what remains after everything else has been exhausted is the basic fact of awareness itself, consciousness observing its own existence, finding within that observation the complete range of experience that immortal life allows. The observation becomes the experience, the watching becomes the living, the awareness becomes the meaning that requires no external justification or cosmic purpose. You close your eyes and feel the familiar weight of infinite tomorrows settling around you like a blanket woven from the fabric of eternity itself. The weight no longer crushes because you've learned to distribute it differently, to carry it, not as burden, but as the natural consequence of being what you are. The divine existence that once felt like punishment now reveals itself as the ultimate expression of what consciousness can become when it transcends all limitations except the limitation of its own perfection. Sleep comes finally bringing with it dreams of mortality that remind you of what was lost when godhood was gained, but also dreams of infinity that suggest what might yet be discovered within the golden boundaries of divine existence. The dreams blend together in patterns that reflect the essential paradox of immortal consciousness, forever yearning for what it cannot have, forever possessing what it cannot fully appreciate, forever existing in the space between desire and fulfillment, where meaning emerges from the very impossibility of resolution. And in that space, between sleeping and waking, between mortality and divinity, between emptiness and fullness, between burden and blessing, you find what remains when everything else has been stripped away. The irreducible essence of consciousness, itself aware and eternal, and somehow, despite everything, still capable of surprise at its own existence. The divine night settles over Olympus like a benediction spoken in a language older than words, and you rest within its embrace, knowing that rest is possible. Even in perfection, peace is achievable. Even in eternity, contentment is discoverable. Even in the golden cage of divine existence, tomorrow will bring the same eternal day, but tomorrow is also the day when you will continue the endless exploration of what it means to be divine, what it costs to be perfect, what it requires to find meaning in meaninglessness. What remains is you divine and eternal and perfectly impossibly magnificently trapped in the beautiful prison of your own existence, learning moment by moment how to transform that prison into sanctuary, that trap into gift, that burden into the very foundation upon which all meaning rests.